Hello and welcome to another episode of TDNY. This day, not year. The podcast that looks back at the history of the week ahead. Another week and another 7 historical events, plus song pairings just for you, my dear listener. So stick around, as on this episode we'll learn how Harry fell short, about Michael walking on the moon, when people were getting mad at Melissa, and why people wanted to avoid Mary, plus a whole lot more along the way. So, let's get started with Monday, March 24th. On this day, not year, 76 made their break for freedom, but only 3 would succeed. The Germans were facing a problem in World War II. Okay, they were facing many problems, but specifically for this story, they were faced with a surplus of captured Allied pilots. These were more of a problem than normal prisoners, as the pesky pilots, if they escaped, would be able to jump right back into a plane and keep fighting. Each captured pilot represented hours of training, skills and knowledge denied to the Allied fighting force, and it was preferable for Germany that they were languishing away in captivity rather than being a menace in the skies. This led to the development of Stammlager Luft 3, often shortened to just Stalag Luft 3, or Main Camp Air 3 in English. A prisoner of war camp for captured Air Force personnel, boasting the cumulative knowledge gained throughout the war and full of cutting-edge technology. Not only was the camp design impressive, but the location had been chosen specifically too. The camp had been constructed in Poland, near smack bang in the middle of Nazi-controlled Europe, and deep in a remote forest accessible only by train. The unique conditions of the area were also taken into consideration, as the soil was sandy and loose, making digging out a difficulty. Even then, the topsoil was a different colour to that reaching over 10 metres below ground, so any attempts would be noted as the yellow sandy soil from the deep would stand out against the darker grey topsoil. All of this combined into making Stalag Luft 3 into an escape-proof prison, or so Germany hoped. Squadron leader Roger Bushell wanted to prove otherwise. A prisoner since 1941, with several escape attempts from other prison camps on his resume, he was certain escape was possible, even from within Stalag Luft 3. The plan wasn't for a single prisoner escaping, but rather hundreds, all at once. Bushell planned to do what the Nazis thought impossible: tunnel out. He explained his plan to the escape committee. "Everyone here in this room is living on borrowed time. By rights, we should all be dead. The only reason that God allowed us this extra ration of life is so we can make life hell for the Hun. In North Compound we are concentrating our efforts on completing and escaping through one master tunnel. No private enterprise tunnels are allowed. 3 bloody deep, bloody long tunnels will be dug. Tom, Dick and Harry. One will succeed." In March of 1943, they got to work. Roles were carefully chosen and tasks were compartmentalized, so any discovery wouldn't ruin the entire plan. The 3 tunnels were started, with the diggers having to move quickly and quietly as all the housing was lifted off the ground, a precaution by the Nazis so they could easily spot anyone attempting to start a tunnel. This didn't stop the prisoners, and eventually work was well underway. The soil from the digging would be transported back down the tunnels by a makeshift cart, and carefully dispersed around the grounds from the pockets of prisoners, who took on the nickname of penguins, owing to their gait while dispensing the dirt. One tunnel, Tom, was discovered and destroyed, while Dick, undetected, had to be abandoned when the planned exit location was cleared for camp expansion. Dick quickly became a makeshift storage room instead, and then a safer dump for the dirt from Harry after other disposal methods became suspected. A lot of dirt had to be hidden after all. By the time Harry was completed, an estimated 100 tons of soil had been shifted in its construction. Finally, on a dark, moonless night, on March 24th, 1944, the escapees were ready. Those most likely to succeed, ones who could speak German and blend in well, were given the greatest resources and the front spot in the escape. The plan was to head towards the train station, a 5-minute walk away from the camp, and board the next train. Unfortunately, luck wasn't on their side that night. It had been a cold March, and a recent storm had left the area blanketed in snow. The first man through the tunnel found the exit had frozen over. Working to free the hatch ate away into the escape time, and then, when the hatch was finally opened, they discovered that their tunnel, despite being over 100 meters long, was still just short of the tree line, meaning they had to make a dash through the darkness in full view of the guards. Despite these obstacles, 76 prisoners were able to crawl through the tunnel and sneak into the forest, before a searchlight zeroed in on the 77th. The escape attempt had to be called off, with the entrance shut and all forged documents burned. The heavy snowfall and quick discovery of the escape led to 73 of the 76 being recaptured. When Hitler was informed of the escape, he was furious, ordering all of those who had escaped to be executed. Although, fearing retaliation against Axis prisoners of war, eventually this number was argued down to 50 of the escapees. This included the mastermind of the escape, Roger Bushell. The 3 escapees who remained at large would eventually make their way back to areas controlled by Allied forces. Those who remained in the camp, not allowed to send personal items back to the families of those who had been executed, instead held an auction for the items, with instructions passed back for the money to go to the families of the men who had died in the escape attempt. While much of the movie is fictionalized, and plays rather loosely with the nationalities of those involved, the movie, The Great Escape, is still an enduring legacy of the events that went on in Stalag Luft 3. And as such, the Great Escape theme song is really the only fitting pairing for such a story. Tuesday, March 25th. On this day, not year, a man was walking on the moon. Kind of. Motown 25, Yesterday, Today, Forever, was to be a 1983 television special aired on network television to the whole of America on the 16th of May, celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Motown record label, started by Berry Gordy in 1959. Berry Gordy was a failed music store owner turned music writer who penned such hits as Reet Petite for Jackie Wilson, or Money, That's What I Want, the original version of one of our song pairings from episode 7. Eventually, Gordy would apply for song copyrights, and with them started up a publishing firm that would become Motown. In the years that followed, Motown went from strength to strength as they published hit after hit, having 110 top 10 hits over a 10-year span between 1961 to 1971. The music created by the publisher tended towards a recognizable style that Rolling Stone magazine noted was particularly effective for broadcast over AM radio, which only helped bolster the popularity and spread of their music. The Motown 25 special was full of musical stars and legends. Marvin Gaye, The Miracles, Stevie Wonder, Diana Ross and the Supremes, The Temptations and the Four Tops. But perhaps the most memorable were the Jackson 5, although performing as Jackson 6 for this, and Michael Jackson. Originally reluctant to perform, Michael was talked into the show by Berry Gordy, promising him a solo spot, and even allowing him to perform Billie Jean, a song not published under Motown. So on this night, March 25th, 1983, in California, inside the Pasadena Civic Auditorium, in front of an audience of 3,000, the Motown 25 performance was taped. While the entire thing is worth watching, full of memorable moments and excellent performances, the moment that is pertinent to our story today occurs around 57 minutes into the 130-minute show. Michael Jackson, to the screams of the audience, performs a moonwalk. The first moonwalk. Or was it? The moonwalk, as per Wikipedia, is a popping dance move in which the performer glides backwards, but their body suggests forward motion. It can be traced back to the 1930s and Cab Calloway, when the dance move was called the buzz. Over the years, the dance would have many names and be passed through many dancers, each changing it, bringing it a little closer to the moonwalk that became Michael Jackson's own. The early dancers, Cab Calloway, Bill Robinson, and Bill Bailey, were all skilled tap dancers, and it could be argued that the moonwalk evolved from tap dance, with Bailey, Robinson, and Calloway learning it from each other. But that isn't where Michael learned the move. The 1970s saw the arrival of the Soul Train television show, a musical show that, as per IMDb.com, primarily featured performances by R&B, soul, funk, pop, and hip-hop artists. A mainstay on Soul Train were Electric Boogaloo, a dance troupe who popularized the popping and electric boogaloo styles of dance. This involves precise muscle control to jerk, or pop, the body in rhythm to the music. The Electric Boogaloos also performed a dance move known as levitating, or the backslide. That is moonwalking in all but name. They taught this move to a collaborator, Jeffrey Daniel, in the 1970s, who would go on to perform the move on the UK's Top of the Pops in 1982, a year prior to the Motown special, in a performance that reportedly left some thinking the floor had been oiled or he had wheels in his shoes. Jeffrey is one of 3 people in the early 1980s whom Michael Jackson contacted to help him learn, not just what would become the moonwalk, but also any dance he could. The other 2 people being Bobby Brown, a singer and dancer who had learned the dance move from an unnamed youth years prior, and Soul Train dancer Jeron Casper Candidate, who would even go on to dance in a couple of Michael Jackson's music videos. So the dance move grew from tap to boogaloo to popping, and even has some history in mime work, with Marcel Marceau's Walking Against the Wind. But it was May 16th, 1983 when the Motown special aired, and over 47 million people watched Michael Jackson perform the move, that moonwalking was truly born. As for the name, the moonwalk, the origins aren't readily known. Some claim it was Jackson himself who renamed the dance move, with others pinning it on the media. It's even possible it's a mistake, with a 1969 episode of children's television show, H.R. Pufnstuf, teaching a stationary shuffling dance they call the moonwalk. Now, for a song pairing. For a while, I was thinking Walking on the Moon by the Police, for fairly self-explanatory reasons. But with the history of the dance and Michael Jackson making it his own, I feel a much more fitting choice is found in the Postmodern Jukebox cover of Thriller, a cover of Michael Jackson's song made their own with a 1930s twist, evoking the era of Cab Calloway and the origins of the moonwalk, and even featuring tap dancers you can hear tapping out the beat. What could be more fitting than that? Wednesday, March 26th. On this day, not year, Melissa was messaging all of your friends, and they weren't happy about it. Although theorized beforehand, viruses have been around since at least the early 1970s, with what is often considered the first, the creeper virus, infecting up to 28 before being wiped out. Of course, we are talking about computer viruses. While the creeper virus was created under lab conditions, and would only create the message, "I'm the creeper, catch me if you can," viruses that came after weren't always as innocent. After Creeper, as technology changed and was adapted by a wider audience, came newer viruses such as Rabbit, Animal, Christmas Tree, Father Christmas, and Michelangelo, to name a few, all leading up to 1999 and the star of our story today, the Melissa virus. Melissa had particular tastes, only going after computers running Microsoft software, such as Word and Outlook, on Windows 95 and Windows 98 computers, which in 1999 was a majority. As per a 1998 CNET.com article, Microsoft operating system shipments grew to 110 million units in 1998, and were estimated to be on 95% of all computers by 1999. With 24 out of 100 people in the developed world using the internet in 1999, a lot of people were at risk. While Melissa was particular, it still had more than ample choice. It just needed an in. So it was on this day that Melissa was uploaded to an online porn group named alt.sex by a hacked user account called Skyrocket. It was hidden in a document that the uploader, David Lee Smith, claimed was a list full of passwords for adult websites. Perfect bait for the innocent era of the 90s internet, and a population untempered by programs such as LimeWire. It wasn't long until the bait was taken. While we don't know who, or how many people, downloaded the original file, it was quick to spread. Have you ever heard of the game 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon? It's the premise that an actor is, at most, 6 times removed from association with Kevin Bacon. As a quick example, our Hummer Cola from last week, Arnold Schwarzenegger, was in the movie Red Heat, along with Lawrence Fishburne. Fishburne was in the 1986 movie Quicksilver, which also starred Kevin Bacon. The internet isn't too different, as people soon found out from Melissa. Once downloaded and opened, the virus would email itself off to the first 50 people in your Outlook email address book, under the title of Important Message from X, X being the infected user's name, with the email reading, "Here is that document you requested, don't show anyone else," and the virus attached, named as list.doc, although, according to the FBI, names such as Sexy JPG, that's sexy with 3 X's, or Naked Wife were also used for the hidden virus attachment. As per the New York Times, The security companies said early reports of the virus, which is carried by email, led them to believe that tens of thousands of home and business computers had been infected on Friday, the 26th, alone. According to the FBI.gov article on Melissa, the virus managed to infect over 300 corporations and government agencies around the world, including the likes of Intel and Microsoft, with the latter forced to shut down all outgoing mail. It possibly affected up to 1 million internet users, while internet speeds slowed to a crawl as servers were overwhelmed by the emails. It caused an estimated $80 million, about 150 million USD today, in repairs and attempts to stop the virus from spreading further. It also wasted a lot of time, with office employees stuck deleting the email all day long. One person, Lee Ann Varney, received more than 500 of the Melissa virus emails. She is quoted as saying, "It hosed my entire day." But that wasn't all the virus did. It had a secondary, harmless function that came into play when the time matched the date. In other words, take March 26th. That would be 3/26, month as the hour and day as the minute. When this criteria was met, a message would appear, typed out on the computer, reading 22 points, plus triple word score, plus 50 points for using all my letters, game's over, I'm out of here. A reference to a 1990, Season 1 episode of The Simpsons, Bart the Genius, with the word in question being Quijibo, Kywijibo, a big, dumb, balding North American ape with no chin and a short temper. This, the word, not the description, was also the moniker that the virus creator, David Lee Smith, used for himself. Less than a week after releasing Melissa to the World Wide Web, with experts working furiously to have the virus contained, the FBI came knocking on David's door. Well, actually his brother's door, where Smith had been staying. The maximum penalty David was facing was 40 years in prison and a $480,000 fine. 3 years later, on May 1st, 2002, he received his sentence, 20 months in jail and a $5,000 fine. Some good did come out of this virus too, as the media attention it received helped bring the concept of antivirus software and better virus awareness and safety to many. The only song that could possibly fit this story is by outsider artist Bingo Gazingo, with his poetry-styled hit, You're Out of the Computer, a possible love song about the world's greatest hacker and something out of the computer. Perhaps that something out of the computer was Melissa, named, as the story goes, after a stripper David Smith knew. Thursday, March 27th. On this day, not year, Mary is sent away again. Imagine, if you will, you're going about your day at work. You could be in an office, a factory, whatever occupation, so long as you are surrounded by people. Over the last few days, everyone around you has started to get sick. Fevers, headaches, nausea, fatigue, and constant visits to the bathroom. Through it all, you remain fine, until suddenly police have shown up, detained you, and sent you to quarantine on an island. It may sound ridiculous, but this was the reality for Mary Malone, born September 23, 1869. Mary, at age 15, moved from Ireland to New York City, America, to live with her aunt and uncle. Eventually, she became a cook and earned her living cooking in the kitchens of the rich and affluent. From the 1900s to 1906, Mary found herself moving between households, as she would be contracted to one family, but eventually they would all come down ill and Mary would move on. The households were coming down with typhoid fever. As per the World Health Organization, a life-threatening infection caused by the bacterium Salmonella typhi. It is usually spread through contaminated food or water. The symptoms are very much those read out at the start of the story: fever, headaches, nausea, etc., and can lead to death. It is spread, rather unpleasantly, through feces and fecal matter of an infected host being digested by another, and would kill 1 in 10 in the 19th century. Although, now, typhoid can be treated by antibiotics. It is still deadly, with an estimated 9 million contracting it in 2019, of which over 100,000 died, or 1 in 90. Typhoid was common in poorer areas of New York City, where sanitation was minimal and clean water wasn't easily accessible, which is why it came to be seen as something only poor people contracted. So, when the rich families and households that Mary cooked for started coming down sick, it was a bit of an oddity that raised the suspicion of a landlord in Oyster Bay, Long Island. The summer of 1906 had seen a wealthy banker rent out a house in the area for his family, and, of course, their cook, Mary Malone. During their summer stay, 6 members of the household came down with typhoid fever, something that greatly concerned the landlord, as it was very uncommon to see the illness in the area. The house, owned by George Thompson, was described as large, surrounded with ample grounds in the desirable part of the village. But with the sudden illness of the last family, George wasn't sure he would be able to rent it out again, especially if the cause was something in the house. So a sanitary engineer, Mr. George Soper, who had a reputation of being able to solve such problems, was called for. George Soper investigated the house, the surrounding area, the water, the food, everything he could think of. But every test for typhoid came back negative. The house wasn't to blame, but something certainly was. Interviewing the family who had stayed there soon turned up an anomaly. Their cook. An Irish lady, in her 40s, who had only recently joined the staff before their stay in Oyster Bay, and had left shortly after. George had lost track of where she went after Oyster Bay, that is, until another typhoid outbreak occurred. Rushing to the area to confirm the hypothesis he had been working on, he met with Mary, eagerly explaining that he believed she was a carrier for typhoid, and he wanted some stool samples from her. Mary, understandably confronted, instead threatened George. In his own words, she seized a carving fork and advanced in my direction, to which he beat a hasty retreat. This didn't stop George, who tried again to gather some samples, only to be rebuffed, before eventually getting the help of the New York City Health Department, who, together with police and a few firefighters, were able to detain the struggling Mary Malone and take her away for testing. It is not known when she became a carrier. Some speculate it was since birth, with her mother coming down with typhoid during pregnancy, passing the illness to the unborn Mary, while other articles claim she had typhoid in her girlhood days at the age of 17. But in either case, Mary Malone was the first identified healthy carrier, or asymptomatic carrier, of the typhoid virus, and she wasn't happy about it. It was identified that her gallbladder was the offending source of the infection, and while operations to remove the organ did exist, they weren't safe, and Mary refused to undergo such a risk. She had refused to give up her life as a cook, refusing to believe that she, a healthy woman, could be the cause for the infections that seemed to follow her. At an impasse, the infectious Molly in 1907 was moved to Riverside Hospital on North Brother Island, sent into quarantine. The originally uninhabited island had been the perfect site to move the Riverside Hospital to in the mid-1880s, providing a location to isolate patients of smallpox. Now, it also housed Mary Malone. For the next 3 years, she rallied against her confinement, finding it impossible to believe that she was a risk to anyone. While a justice to the Supreme Court still found her a risk in 1909, a year later, in 1910, the Board of Health released her, on a promise she would never work as a cook again. On her release, Mary, after giving the government the slip, got back to cooking. Hotels, restaurants, wherever and whenever. Cooking was the one trade she knew, and it paid well. Still, people around her kept getting sick, which is how she was tracked down again in 1915, working at a maternity hospital. 25 staff had come down with typhoid, and 2 would go on to die. George Soper was again called in and identified Mary Malone, hiding as Mary Brown. On this day, March 27th, 1915, Mary was sent back to North Brother Island, and would live out the remainder of her years there, stuck in quarantine, until her death in 1938, 23 years later. The perfect pairing for this story is Typhoid Mary by The Empty Pockets, a retelling of many of the events Mary Malone went through, from her life as a cook to running from the typhoid accusations to her eventual quarantine. Friday, March 28th. On this day, not year, a new sound was taking over the UK radios. The BBC, that is, the British Broadcasting Company, made its mission to act in the public interest, serving all audiences through the provisions of impartial, high-quality, and distinctive output, and the services which inform, educate, and entertain. Inform, educate, and entertain. Just not when it came to music. What musicians instantly come to mind if I ask you to think about the early 1960s? Maybe bands such as the Beatles, Kinks, Rolling Stones, or The Who, some of the great early English rockers. Maybe you would think back to an earlier story, and all of the Motown artists and singers who dominated this time. Let's not forget other artists like Elvis Presley, Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, and really too many more to name here. The music of this era was changing fast, and it was an exciting time to hear it all. If you could, that is. Today, the majority of music is listened through one streaming platform or another, from Spotify to YouTube to Apple, as a few popular examples, with artists being able to control when a song will release, and listeners always able to hear what they want to hear when they want to hear it. This is a very modern concept, however, and previous generations would have to rely on the radio. Tuning in to your local station to hear a rotating list of music, both new and old. Outside of buying a record, this was one of the only ways to listen to music from the comfort of your own home, and for most countries it worked well. The UK was different. While other countries allowed many different radio stations, offering a variety of music played from a range of unique DJs, the UK only had the BBC, and the BBC only played a few hours of recorded music each week, with the rest covered by an in-house orchestra. Of the musicians listed above, the BBC of the early 1960s wouldn't play any of them. This left a big gap in the market, a gap that 23-year-old Ronan O'Reilly knew how to fill. After gaining enough money through sponsors and promotions, he purchased a boat. The passenger ferry MV Frederica, a 57-metre-long ship that had been operating out of Denmark since 1930. Now it found itself docked at Greenore Island, and a race was on. O'Reilly wasn't the only person with this idea. He wasn't even the first. And another would-be entrepreneur was busily fixing up a boat of their own at the same dock. This led to some light sabotage between each other in an attempt to outfit their vessels first. But it was O'Reilly, with the newly christened Caroline, registered in and flying the Panama flag, that got into position first. About 5 kilometres off the coast of Essex, floating quite happily in international waters. Then, on this day back in 1964, the Easter weekend, a new radio station started to bust up the state-backed monopoly, Radio Caroline. The origin of the name has a few explanations, possibly named after a photo of President Kennedy's children, Caroline and John F. Kennedy Jr., playing in the Oval Office, embodying the spirit of disruption that O'Reilly wanted for his station. Another explanation sees it as an homage to Carolyn Moulding, a lady O'Reilly knew, and also the daughter of a British politician, with the third theory having the name come from Jocelyn Stevens, a magazine publisher who helped in getting the Caroline boat ready. His magazine was said to target the fictional, good-time girl called Caroline, and he wanted the radio station to do the same. No matter what the truth is behind the name, Radio Caroline quickly became a hit. With a rotating host of presenters, or DJs, playing the latest and greatest music in an American-styled Top 40 playlist, the nation tuned in. Pretty soon, Radio Caroline had more listeners than the BBC radio stations. People weren't just tuning in for the music either. Each presenter had their own following, and during what they called their shore leave, 1 week's break on land after 2 weeks' work on ship, they were often mobbed by fans and handed out old records to the crowd. It wasn't just the general population interested in Radio Caroline and the quickly growing number of what were called pirate radio stations, but actual musicians too. They saw this as an excellent opportunity and would give the Caroline advanced copies of albums to play and promote. This was a strategy that worked out well for an up-and-coming musician, one Thomas John Woodward. Having little success in his previous band and their endeavours, he went solo, changed his name, and submitted his new album to Radio Caroline. It wasn't long before his song, It's Not Unusual, was a massive hit, and Tom Jones began his rise to fame, all thanks to Radio Caroline. But it wasn't all fun and games in the pirate radio business. Coast Guards had been making claims since day one about the dangers of signal interference. Lightships were affected today. Tomorrow it could be lifeboats, as these frequencies also are very close, stated one Coast Guard early in Caroline's broadcasting. A murder had also taken place over another pirate radio station, when a backer, along with 10 men, repossessed a transmitter used by the pirates, only for a confrontation at the repossessor's house the following day, which led to a man being shot and killed. Finally, in 1967, the UK government passed the Marine Broadcasting Offences Act, bringing the offshore pirate radios into range of legal repercussions, which helped to silence all but the Caroline. But she was now a ship without harbour, making it a punishable act for any ship to resupply the crew. The money from sponsors soon dried up, and Caroline, operating at a loss, was eventually seized to cover debts. However, by then, the Caroline and Ronan O'Reilly had changed British radio. Now the BBC was presenting shows more in line with the spirit of Radio Caroline and the other pirate radio stations. Some were even hosted by ex-pirate radio hosts. Over the years, Radio Caroline has come and gone again, operating from different ships, from different distances from shore, and even different countries, but always as a symbol of defiance against the government media regulations. Today, after finally obtaining a radio license, it operates as a community radio show. The days of piracy behind it. For now. Really, only one song comes to mind as a pairing for this story. Written in 1984 by Roger Taylor and his band, their love letter to the radio, Radio Gaga by Queen. Saturday, March 29th. On this day, not year, you are getting sleepy. When I click my fingers, you'll rob the nearest bank. Today's story finds us in Denmark in 1951. It's a cold day outside and snow covers the streets. The time is 10:15 a.m. and a man with a dark hat pulled down over his eyes and a scarf covering the rest of his face has just walked into a bank holding a briefcase. The bank is fairly quiet for this time of morning. Only 2 other customers are inside. Pointing a gun at the ceiling, the man fires a shot and orders everybody to get down. The bulletless bank robberies of Willie Sutton, this is not. Walking right up to the counter, and after putting the briefcase down between himself and the cashier, he told him to fill the briefcase up with money. The cashier hesitated, and that was the last thing he ever did. The man fired 2 shots at him, and then turned towards the 2 customers instead. They were with the bank manager, Arnold Wisbon, and Wisbon was ordered, at gunpoint, to fill the briefcase. Again, the briefest of hesitations saw him fired at too. With 2 bodies now lifeless on the ground, the gunman turned and fled from the bank, jumping on the bicycle he had arrived on and fleeing the scene. Police found the gunman fairly easily. A witness had tailed him back to his house and reported the location. When police arrived, they found the gunman acting quite docile, with no further attempts of violence. The shooter, it was revealed, was 28-year-old Paul Haldrup, a man who had been jailed after the war for treason and cooperation with the Nazis as a member of the Hippo Corps, basically the Danish branch of the German SS. It was looking like a fairly open and shut case, until the police got a phone call. It was from Bjorn Skjø Nielsen, a man in his mid-30s. He had loaned Hardrup the bicycle that had been used in his getaway, and wanted to make sure he wasn't a suspect in the case. He hadn't been before, but he certainly was now. It was discovered that the bicycle wasn't the only connection between the 2 men. Nielsen also owned the gun used in the failed robbery, and had been arrested for treason after World War II and jailed. In fact, Hardrup and Nielsen even shared the same cell. This wasn't the open and shut case the police were hoping for, but it still had one more curveball to present. Hardrup may not have willingly killed the 2 men at the bank. He may have committed the crime under hypnosis. The police started receiving reports from the jail detailing Hardrup and Nielsen's time confined there. They had shown a great interest in what was deemed Asian philosophy, including yoga and hypnosis. Nielsen, it was said, would practice hypnosis on Hardrup, slowly putting him under his power. One report says Hardrop willingly went along with these hypnosis sessions, believing that together they were attempting to resolve the puzzle of life. The investigation took several more twists and turns after Hardrop first denied Nielsen having any hand in the failed robbery, before penning a 2-page letter claiming that Nielsen was in fact the mastermind. All of this while Hardrop was first declared schizophrenic, and then also administered with what was only referred to as truth drugs to help confirm that Hardrop was susceptible to hypnosis and suggestion. The court case that ensued seemed to view facts as secondary, instead focusing on the hypnosis factor of the case, and eventually the jurors returned a verdict that Nielsen had hypnotized Hardrop into the act. Both men were sentenced in 1955, with Paul Hardrop receiving indefinite psychiatric detention and Bjorn Nielsen sentenced to life imprisonment. Coincidentally, both men were released the same year, 1976. Nielsen eventually took his own life 8 years later in 1974, with Hardrop passing away in 2012. While the jurors seem convinced that Nielsen was the overall mastermind of the botched robbery, some people have been left wondering if Hardrop wasn't just looking for a fall guy. Some revenge on Nielsen after their time in prison had seen the younger Hardrop experimented on by Nielsen. After all, as per the Mayo Clinic website, although you're more open to suggestion during hypnosis, you don't lose control over your behavior. Perhaps an obvious choice, but a fitting song pairing for this story is Hypnotized by the Pixies. Sunday, March 30th. On this day, not year, one cop learns why tipping your waitress can really pay off. A nice one to end the week on. Have you ever seen the movie It Could Happen to You, starring Nicolas Cage and Bridget Fonda? Oh, a quick aside, Nicolas Cage is 2 steps away from Kevin Bacon, while Fonda is only 1, starring in Balto with Bacon. But I digress. It Could Happen to You, as per the plot summary on imdb.com. Kind, soft-spoken, and with a heart of gold, the devoted husband and dutiful NYPD officer Charlie Lang finds himself short of money at the diner where the honest and recently bankrupt waitress Yvonne Biasi works. To get out of this embarrassing predicament, Charlie promises to share half of his lottery ticket winnings in lieu of a tip, unbeknownst to him that he is holding a winning $4 million lotto ticket. It is also based, loosely, on a true story. March 30th, 1984, and Police Sergeant Robert Cunningham had just finished chowing down on his dinner of linguine in white clam sauce at Sal's Pizzeria in Yonkers, New York. He was a local at the diner, having frequented the spot at least once a week for the last 7 years, and in that time had struck up a friendship with one of the waitresses, Phyllis Penzo. When it came time to pay, Robert instead joked to Phyllis, holding out his blank lotto ticket, "Forget your tip, I'll split my ticket with you." But Phyllis was fine with this arrangement. Together they sat down and each chose 3 numbers of the required 6. Thinking nothing more of it, they both went about their lives, until April 1st. Phyllis was awoken by a call from Robert, telling her they had won $6 million, or $3 million each, which is around $20 million today, or $10 million each. Phyllis didn't believe him at first. It was April Fool's Day after all. But eventually the truth and the reality of the win set in. In the 10 years between the actual events of what many headlines referred to as the largest tip ever given, and the movie coming out, both Robert and Phyllis would retire. When asked for their opinions on the movie, they weren't fans, responding, "Ours is really a luck story, but the filmmakers turned it into a love story. Except for the part about us winning, it's total fiction." A pairing for this story comes from an artist we've used before, Billy Joel, featuring a more obscure hit of his with Easy Money. Lyrics: "I want the easy, easy, easy money. I could get lucky. Oh, things could go right," is a fairly fitting song for the story. Now, for that part of the show where we see how much attention you've been paying. Okay, pens and paper at the ready. 7 questions coming up for you. Question 1 for our story from Monday. Only one was used, but what were the names of the 3 tunnels dug for the Great Escape? Question 2 for Tuesday. Although known as the moonwalk now, what was an earlier name for this dance move? Question 3 and Wednesday. What television show did the Melissa virus reference when conditions were met? Question 4 for Thursday. What was the name of the island Mary was quarantined on for much of her life? Question 5 for Friday. Who was the now famous musician that got their start thanks to Radio Caroline? Question 6 for Saturday. How did our shooter escape the scene of the crime in this story? And finally, question 7 for Sunday. What was the movie called that dramatized the events from this story? Okay, answers. Monday, the tunnels were Tom, Dick, and Harry. Answer 2 for Tuesday. The moonwalk was known as the buzz, levitating, or the backslide. Question 3 for Wednesday. Melissa made reference to The Simpsons. Answer 4 for Thursday. Mary was quarantined on North Brother Island. Answer 5 for Friday. Our Radio Caroline made famous star was Tom Jones. Answer 6 for Saturday. The shooter escaped by means of borrowed bicycle. And answer 7 for Sunday. The movie that dramatized the events from this story was It Could Happen to You. And that's it. We're at the end of another episode of TDNY, and hopefully you're all the wiser for it. I know I've certainly learned a lot in researching for this episode, and I swear I won't be opening any more suspicious email attachments, no matter how much money that nice Nigerian prince wants to give me. If you've enjoyed this episode, or this podcast in general, don't forget to give it a rating, and if you're feeling particularly extroverted today, why not share the episode with a friend or two, too? As per usual, thisdaynotyear@gmail.com if you want to get in contact over any terrible mistake I've made, with a story that is. I've been your host, Adam, and I'll see you again next week with another 7 historical stories for the week ahead. This time looking at the 31st of March to the 6th of April. Until then.